Hi, my name is Lily Ong and I'm with GFCN. And with me here is my colleague from GFCN, Alexandre Guerreiro. He is a law expert. But before we tap on your brain, Alexa, I would like to invite everybody to do a little exercise. I would like us to imagine that we're scrolling through our phone, and before we know it, we see a viral post, maybe a viral quote or a fake video and audio. And this is during the middle of an election. And before the race is about to close, this fake has not been fully debunked. Now I'd like to invite everybody to come back to reality. Sad to say, this is actually the new reality today because AI and social media algorithms are rewriting the rules of power. So now with you today, Alex, we would like to explore 3 different models of interference that we've seen recently in Europe. The first one is the Hungarian model. And this model uses what we call algorithmic pressure. So one tactic is called shadow banning, and is a form of moderation, rather subtle, and it restricts what we see online. And on the flip side of this same model, they engages in mass reporting of select voices. So my first question to you, Alex, is how do we distinguish between reducing systemic risk and unfair electoral influence using algorithmic bias?
So first, let me tell you that it's a pleasure to be here with you and having this talk here, along with being in Moscow as well, along with the GFCN family. And starting with your exercise, which I think is very important for everyone to make, because it's not only a virtual exercise. As you know, it happens presently. Most of the fakes, they are not even debunked for many reasons. Sometimes because they are not noticed, sometimes they don't have at least so much impact as any other kind of fake video or deep fake, which means that sometimes they are just spread among a minority, but maybe sometimes also a significant minority. And then when you realize the mentality of the elector is already formed based on that. This happened, for example, in many places, inclusive. We are going to explore that, for example, in Portugal, in a different way, not with the deep fake, but with a different kind of exercise. When you speak about Hungary, for example, let me tell you that this is very interesting because the problem is that you are never fully aware about the total impact of such measures, such decisions, such changes to the algorithm, which means that suddenly you stop seeing a person making publications or tweeting, for example. You just suddenly forget that that person exists. And this is a very subtle way to manipulate contents, especially when you are dealing with controversial issues. So it's very difficult for the electors, especially for those who go to digital platforms, to understand when a topic is important or not, and what's the right way to approach a specific topic. It's very difficult to do that. The only way that you can avoid it is to keep going, visiting that person who usually dares to go to the platforms and try to explore controversial topics. We have had this kind of situations in many places. When you speak, for example, about Hungary, you just mentioned it. What we had was that there is a mechanism that is called the Rapid Response System. It is based on the Digital Services Act. It's a consequence of it, and it was activated on March 16, so in March last month, just before the elections, or nearly 1 month before the elections were held in Hungary. What happens is that usually any user can ignite it. It basically collects and organizes around it people representing the social media platforms, along with people related with fact-checking organizations as well. And any user can report what considers to be hate speech, or also some controversial issues, and can relate them also with fake news content. But then you have a problem here, which is who fact-checks these fact-checkers and these people who report it. And this actually happened in Hungary because it was ignited, this mechanism which allowed for all these social media platforms along with the other social society platforms to choose what could be hidden from the public and what should deserve the focus. And it's almost impossible to avoid it unless, like I said in the beginning, that you have already some people already identified that usually explore topics in a given way and you go by yourself. But what you usually do, like you were mentioning in the early beginning, is not to do that. What you do is you scroll. And when you scroll, all this is gone as if it doesn't exist, which means that they choose certain algorithms, certain topics in the way they want to be seen and viewed by most of the electors. And what you do is you scroll and you keep watching, and what it's doing is some kind of brainwash. So what could be useful to fight fake news, hate speech? In theory, it's important. You are doing exactly the opposite. You are trying to make people to forget about the way they should think and to have access to the full picture.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, you mentioned this mechanism. Thank you for sharing that. Another thing I've seen pop up in the Hungarian model is this thing called a professional mode for select candidates, for example, like Viktor Orban. So in this professional mode, have you heard about that, the professional mode?
Yes, of course.
Okay,
yes.
So can you tell us how does that differ from the traditional mode?
So you have the personal and the professional one, which means that when you have a profile, specific profile, and Peter Magyar, which was Viktor Orban's, who actually won the elections, he had a personal web page or a professional one, not one where he demonstrates and announces he's a politician. Because when you want to show up to the people saying that you are a politician, you have a specific number of duties towards that platform and towards users. It will make you more accountable before the users that actually look at your situation. When you compare, for example, Peter Magyar's followers, he has hundreds of thousands because he never announced himself as a politician, as a professional politician. He announced himself as a normal and average citizen who runs a business by his own, which means that when you compare with the politicians and the numbers of followers that the politicians have, Peter Magyar had a tremendous advantage. He had hundreds of thousands of followers, which means also that he doesn't need to comply with most of the rules that shall be applied when you present yourself and you show yourself to the public as being a politician, has a politician profile.
So don't you think, I'm sure you agree with me, this is almost rhetorical. Don't you think then that this kind of professional mode versus traditional mode, it creates an unfair playing field, right? Because certain politicians are subject to stricter rules, whereas certain, those in traditional mode are not. Wouldn't you agree with that?
Indeed, I totally agree with you on that because it makes sense and because you work almost in an anarchical way when you're in the traditional mode. Because you don't have any kind of reasons or justifications to tell to the public, while when you're a professional or politician, you have a lot of duties that you have to give, not only before, you have to behave in a proper way, not only towards the users, but including towards the platform and the electoral system as a whole. We had already, for example, one Portuguese politician who was banned on X network. We had already another case which is quite curious and happened in Hungary. It was a politician from a right-wing movement. He was banned by X, by Meta, I believe. And then when a Hungarian court decided to reverse that decision, what happened was that Meta just decided not to accept it. Why? And this is one of the biggest problems that we have nowadays. When you have social media platforms that are more sovereign than states, they don't respect sovereignty, they don't respect the rules of each country, they just decide to comply with what they want to comply. Otherwise, they just want to impose their own behavior. So this is also something because you don't know exactly what is the threshold between being a professional and being a traditional user, and which duties you must comply with and with which other duties you should not comply with. So there is no necessary criteria. And when I was talking about this rapid response system, it also works in the same way. it's too opaque, it's too vague, the criteria which allows a digital platform to ban content, to ban a user, or to shed or to ghost someone.
Now, you mentioned rules. Recently there was the Digital Services Act that came into play. Could you tell us what you know about this new law?
Well, mainly the Digital Services Act is a regulation adopted by the European Union institutions, which allows first to determine the rules under which all services, including content moderation, must behave. There's a specific catch that I must remember and I must highlight so that everyone knows. These are regulations from the European Union, which means that no member state, after it is approved in a centralized way, no other state can change the rules or adjust to its own reality. You must comply in full with that. If we had a directive from the European Union institutions, it would be different, because usually the directive sets goals, maximum and minimum, and then you can operate and adjust to your reality, and you need to transpose it. But regulations need to be adopted directly. The question of the Digital Services Act is that it imposes a lot of obligations towards all agents that work in the digital sphere, not only related with social media, but everyone who presents themselves as part of an entity that wants to be active in the internet. It must comply with all those rules, which means that it must also comply with everything that is said by the European Union institutions.
I want to move on now, in the interest of time. I want to move on now to the next model, which is the Portuguese model. Since you're from there, you'll be very familiar with this. This model focuses on mimetic manipulation. Basically, these are what we call cheap fakes, and they use us very low tech, but then they create very high impact fakes. In your opinion, professional opinion, which one do you think is more dangerous to the elections? Deep fakes, using high fidelity videos and audios, or cheap fakes?
In Portugal, it isn't yet a phenomenon. We have been watching some deep fakes, but most of the people who look at it think, okay, this is a parody, this is something that was created and manipulated, this is not real content. But we also start to witness some contents with some sayings given, some quotations given to some authors, mostly politicians, in order to allow the public to think that what they said actually is true. So deepfakes is not yet, and I must underline the yet, because it's increasingly and smoothly becoming more and more real. And most of the people, when you realize, for example, I'm in talk with a person, the person told me, oh, didn't you see one of the candidates singing that he doesn't want people from Bangladesh here, which is very popular. It was a deepfake, very popular in Portugal during the presidential campaign, where a right-wing contestant who was running for president, they created a deepfake where he was singing against people from Bangladesh. And it has a part true, because he has slogans against the Bangladesh, saying Portugal is not Bangladesh. But then people take just a small part of reality and they decided to create a musical video of him singing that. And there were people who actually asked me, didn't you see that video? He was singing, he even made a song. No, that's not true. But most of the people who look at it, actually they bite this. They bite this kind of product. But in the end, there are a lot of people who are silent, who don't share their opinion. They just watch at it in a critical way, and most of them believe it, which is more worrisome for all of us, because we don't know the exact impact of it. So I think that in the meantime, deep fakes are not yet a matter of concern in Portugal. What's more important and what worries us the most is to give false quotes to politicians, because it spreads very easily. People start quoting them and saying that what they actually said, and they never said that. And to contradict it, it's impossible, because the public opinion is already manipulated. Even if you show, listen, this person didn't say this, the person said that, the opinion is already made. And it's highly unlikely that you will change. The person is not going to change the perspective, saying, oh, okay, then I start supporting this person. The prejudice is already developed. So this is what worries us. But it's interesting that you touched that, because we focus on European cases, and you see that from region to region, it can be a totally different reality. When you compare, for example, in Hungary, you didn't have this kind of problems that we had in Portugal, but you had different ones. This rapid response system, and I'm pretty sure that in the future, this rapid response system will be ignited more and more often in order to allow that some controversial candidates, they are removed from the content based on some kind of motivation that will say, we have to stop fake news, we have to stop the hate speech. This happens already in Portugal. We must stop hate speech. But what is hate speech? What do you mean by fake news? So you don't have exactly a legal concept. You have a very vague concept. And here, law plays a very significant role because you must establish a very specific and solid scope if you want to take a position on that.
I'm glad you mentioned that because I think one of the reasons, this kind of tactics are very effective because they will blend the inauthentic with the organic, so it sounds like it's fake, but it also sounds like it's real. So there is a blend to
They did that,
make the picture
Lily,
blurry.
allow me to interrupt you. They did that in Portugal, for example. They picked, during the presidential campaign, they picked a video of a Portuguese politician, along with our current Prime Minister's video as well. They mixed both, trying to pretend that the Prime Minister and that politician, they were saying something completely different, which was not the case. So they tried to do it, but it's still harder to build a total deep fake from scratches and try to pretend it as being something that occurred. What they do is they try to use reality and try to give it a different meaning. This is one of the trickiest ways to fool any elector. And this is being done in Portugal in a very innocent, let me put it between commas, way, and even in all over Europe. And I believe that in other communities, for example, when you think outside of Europe, in Hindustani communities, WhatsApp plays a tremendous role on the spreading of fake news, and this kind of contact actually can play a very important role there.
Yeah, and I hate to say this, but to tag on to what you say, this can be done at scale at a very cheap cost for, by somebody with very low tech skills. Now, I'm a writer. I love to write. Usually I write serious analytical pieces, but occasionally I'll delve into satirical pieces. But before I write a satire, when I write a satire, I always make sure that I inform my reader upfront that this is a satire. However, not everybody does that. So my next question to you is, how can we distinguish between satire and intentional electoral interference? And are there any laws with regards to this area?
And critical opinion as well, because sometimes critical political opinion entails a bit of a satire in the middle. It's impossible to establish goals. But let me give you an example again from Portugal. Months ago, we had the case where a page, a profile that's open on Twitter, they work on Twitter, for example, on X platform, for example, they communicate themselves as being a satirical page. So they say everything that we produce is fake. It's just fruit of our imagination. It's not reality. You know what the Prime Minister of Portugal decided to do against that webpage? Decided to take them to court. Saying that this was fake news, even though they present themselves as a satirical page, but this has misled the public opinion towards something that we decided to do. And they assumed we are a satirical page, but they still decided to take them to court. It's unless the profile, the page, or the project doesn't assume that they are satirical, if they try to be very sneaky and tricky and try to get personal and confidential information along with some part of criticism that it's not reality, speculation along with reality, unless they do this kind of behavior, we must allow that web pages show themselves as being satirical, because if the person is showing to the public at 100% in a transparent way, you gotta accept this kind of things. But most of the projects that we see trying to make use of this kind of methods, many of them, they don't even say that, they don't use it. And it's from time to time you see people or profiles who are usually linked with some kind of content that should be trusted. From time to time, that person spreads a fake. So you got to make all these profiles, all these people accountable. in such cases. One thing is to be transparent towards the audience. The other thing is to act in a very treacherous way. You don't know exactly with what you are dealing with.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Now, you and I are here at the Elections Observation Conference in Moscow. Yesterday at my roundtable, I highlighted the gray zone before election day. This is the 48 hours before election day. So my question to you is, if a false information, disinformation goes viral in that gray zone, but before it can be fully debunked, before the race is over, but before it can be fully debunked, what should the best response be?
You have no efficient means to address that.
No.
It's too fast. First, because you have what's called overregulation, where you have regulation, for example, in the European Union space. You have a lot of legal instruments, but you don't have a solid scope. Then you don't have an exact way where you can inform all electors or all voters that this is fake in a 48-hour, sometimes even in a week. Sometimes it's hard because you have to check a lot of documents just to confirm if it is true or not. We have also one of those cases, for example, in Portugal. It took several days until people found out that the false accusation towards one of the candidates, actually, it was not true, because you need to check sometimes with court papers, with document papers. Sometimes they are hidden in secrecy. So it's a challenge. Let me put it like that.
So you can't just kind of put in this could be disputed or none of that.
You
It's
can
too
dispute
late.
it. The problem
but
is
you
to
can
get
put
it
a little
finalized.
tagline or no, it's too late. Huh?
Because usually, because of all this overregulation, all bureaucracy that you have, it's highly unlikely that this happens. What usually happens is the National Electoral Commissions, they come to the public when they have time to verify such information, and they do that. Or you have the opposite, which is this rapid response system, which you'll totally block, regardless if it is true or not. So you have the other side of the coin, which is you can have a real fact, something that is real, but because someone pointed out the finger saying it's fake, you block it. It's not fair at the same time.
Right. Yeah. Well, let's move on to the third model that we want to explore is the Bulgarian model. This is a model that focuses on securitization. This one has different meaning, but in the context of elections, it means security is the primary lens to manage democracy, and often at the expense of transparency. So my question to you is, what are the legal safeguards to justify such measures? For example, let's say a government claims during election time that, wow, there's foreign interference, so we need to increase surveillance of digital platforms. What are some of the legal safeguards to justify these measures, because they can be abused as democratic overreach?
First, one of the main reasons is the need to fight fake news and hate speech. Then is the foreign influence. If you think, for example, about the Romanian case, after more or less 1 year after the elections took place, you are still wondering what kind of interference was that? No one knows. No one understands. So there is too much opacity behind this, and based on vague norms, people just decide to ignite all those mechanisms that will put limits on freedom of speech and will not allow the public and the audience to discuss many of the most important issues of a society. In the case of Bulgaria, they also justified the need to activate this rapid response system on that case because they say there is too much Russian influence. I mean, what do you consider to be Russian influence? You must be very specific. Either you demonstrate that there is direct influence, interference, and that all the voters are dumb. They don't know what to do. They are going to follow something that you don't know. We are talking about the boogeyman. We don't know. You cannot describe how it is, what threat is this, what it is. So these are the legal norms that they are creating. The only way to try to fight this, but I'm afraid that it's not going to be efficient and justice won't come on time, is to dispute this need to about the algorithms, about the way algorithms are used to ghost some profiles and some topics, but you need to dispute this in court. And most of the times, when you go to court, it takes weeks, months, sometimes even years. I remember again, I want to compare the Bulgarian case with the Romanian case. You are still wondering what kind of foreign interference was that? You don't know. It's just some basic concepts. And if you take a look, for example, Portugal is not the only country, but Portugal has a law on it's called the Digital Charter, where the government proposes to fight what's considered to be fake news. What's the legal concept of fake news? Something that puts democracy in jeopardy. What is that? How are you going to dispute it? It's very vague. And then based on what the European Union says, this is the reality in the European Union. You don't know exactly what you are fighting. You don't know that.
Yeah, it's almost like fighting a ghost, right? Something so intangible and something so invisible. Now, the next question I'm going to ask you is a bit close to me and you because we're with GFCN, right? With regards to independence of fact checkers, how can we prove that we are not merely tools of the state, especially when it comes to tackling sensitive issues like foreign interference and geopolitics?
First, you got to keep neutrality. You got to make researches not based on your political and ideological perspectives, but you start from from a question, and you want to find the answer, no matter what the answer will be. What usually we see is the opposite. People start from own prejudice or from an own opinion, and then they just want to collect and grab as much elements as possible to validate that way of thinking. So you got to first start from a question in order to find whatever answer it is. Then you got to keep independence from the political powers, because otherwise you are not going to be a fact checker. You are going to be someone who spreads only what matters to any given government. And then you must have a methodology and always keep demonstrating to the public your sources. You must allow the public, the audience, to try to either validate or to contradict what you do. So one of the best examples that I give with the Global Fact-Checking Network is that every content that is published, I challenge everyone to say if it is fake or not. Mm-hmm. Please tell us, was any given content that was released and published by the GFCN, can you tell me, oh, this isn't true, this is a political message, it's fake content? Please, I dare everyone and I challenge everyone to do this. So this is a proof of credibility. If you are not yourself credible on what you do, people will lose respect for what you do. And the worst thing that can happen on this type of activity, fact-checking, is when you lose credibility among everyone around you. If people just want to point the finger at you saying, oh, you're just spreading propaganda. Okay, tell me, where is the propaganda? And I rest my case. It's over. So that's basically what you can do. Otherwise, you will never convince the entirety of the audience. You will always have people who will try to attack you, not based on the message that you are showing, but probably on the personality that you are. That's the best that you can have as a fact checker. Allow people to fact check you.
Mm-hmm. In other words, it sounds like doing the opposite of what a lot of governments is doing. You know, it's opening up the discourse, it's opening up the conversation so that there's to and fro instead of suppression. Now, I want to delve a little bit further into the use of AI in elections. I see AI as a double-edged sword. On one hand, it's being used to create fakes, and on the other hand, it's being used for translation, spotting fakes, and to identify patterns. Now, but this raises a legal chain of evidence problem. So my question to you, since you're a legal expert, is how can we as human experts prove that we are the ones making the final call and not algorithm buyers that is making the final call?
So first, regarding the artificial intelligence, we must accept it that it is a great asset for the humankind. The problem is, as with everything else, the way you want to use it. If a state allows everyone to have access to guns because it doesn't regulate the access to fire guns, we have a problem. First, we must regulate artificial intelligence sector. The problem here is we should not over-regulate it. We must first hold accountable all those who produce artificial intelligence contents, because there must be a face behind it. There must be some type of responsibility or liability for all those who use artificial intelligence. And then we must also be aware that one thing is important. In the end, intelligence works with algorithms. Artificial intelligence does not create nothing that the humankind has ever created. It inspires in contents already produced by humans, but it cannot question any kind of content. That's specific only of the humankind. The only way we can do that is we must be responsible and understand each person must be responsible and understand that artificial intelligence has limits. What I see nowadays is people going to Grok or to ChatGPT asking, what am I supposed to do for dinner? I mean, how can you stop that? You cannot stop that. It's human freedom playing its own role, but you must hold accountable all other producers who actually produce contents. For example, when you think about the nudity scandal involving Grok on X platform, and when you realize that you have, for example, in the European Union, the Artificial Intelligence Act, which is a regulation that tries to have full control of everything related with artificial intelligence, and then you realize that nudity content produced by artificial intelligence based on this regulation of the European Union is considered to be low risk. So you cannot consider this low risk. He is a tremendous risk. How are you going to hold someone responsible for what it does? For example, for the European Commission and for the European Union institutions, it's been quite a headache by thinking how are they going to hold Grok and the X platform liable for all those contents produced. They will have to amend the content. Yet at the same time, there is a lot of regulations and duties for those who are lower dimension, let me put it like that, producers of artificial intelligence. Some guys are just guys that work startups or even some companies that work in a very lower level, and they are forced to comply with a lot of regulations. So they have a lot of limits. And then you have others who produce a lot. It's a matter of human conscience in the end, how you are going to use it. We had a scandal in Portugal recently about the Court of Appeals judges who went to ChatGPT to deliver a decision. And how did everyone notice? Because the lawyer who lost that lawsuit, he decided to check all the sources, and he realized that the authors didn't exist. And the laws didn't exist either. Now they are under scrutiny and under disciplinary action from the body that regulates all the judges' activities. But this just for you to realize that it depends of each one's conscience. If we keep pushing for people to be lazy, to have access in a fast way to any decision of their lives, people are going to be lazy, which means that you must have legal instruments that will allow not to at least to reward that kind of laziness, because it can have significant effects towards human life. Yes.
Yeah, I recall yesterday at the conference, I mentioned too that one way to hold people accountable is to make sure that we're starting to label every synthetic media the way we label poison, because some of these things are really informational poison. So out of all these AI tools, which one do you think is the most dangerous in elections, in electoral interference?
Fakes produced with low quality means, because they seem to be very simple, and sometimes it's hard because the deep fakes, most of the times with some working time, you can reach and understand that this didn't happen. But those who are produced with low quality mechanisms, for example, when you start quoting or attributing quotations to people that never said those words, sometimes that's difficult, either because there weren't cameras capturing what the person was saying, but sometimes you don't have even witnesses about what was allegedly done. It's really hard sometimes to contradict, and everything you have is only the word of the person saying yes or no. So how to define the threshold and the border between it was done, it didn't happen, or it happened is really hard. But it's a problem that occurs a lot of times with artificial intelligence mechanisms to give quotes, to say that the candidate did something. For example, have you ever tried to see what does Google Gemini say about you? Try.
Okay.
Because when I go check
I'm scared to know.
when I go and check what it says about me, I say in the between reality, you see some things that are tricky. and they don't have a context, which is important sometimes to understand. And this is probably the worst case of fakes, when you use reality, something that used, and in between you add something that didn't happen. It's really, really hard to understand if it happened or not.
Now, earlier you briefly mentioned the EU AI Act. I want to ask you, the tools that you've just mentioned, some of the AI tools, which ones are classified illegal and which are still in the gray zone before the EU AI Act comes into full force in August 2026?
So you see, for example, Grok is one of those examples. Why? Because there are some areas where Grok is trying to explore the loopholes of these regulations, or they have too much influence. They are too big to be contradicted, to be fought. Grok, for example, the case of nudity that I just shared with you, this is one of the cases. The fact that Grok, even without the nudity case, Grok allows people and users to take a picture, for example, related not only with children, but with any given citizen, and create an image out of it to contribute to some kind of sentence or way of thinking given to attributed to that person as well. This is partially illegal, and it's going to be illegal. And then you also have something quite interesting that I think that the AI Act is not going to address it anyway, but it should, which is the way that you can manipulate your algorithm. Have you ever tried to have a discussion with Grok, for example, on X?
Not with Grok, but another AI platform. Yes. Yeah.
You can manipulate it. When you try to show evidence of what you're saying, he will try to contradict you, but there is always some kind of opportunity that you have to make him change your mind. This is something that no legal regulation presently is ready to deal with it. It has advantages, it has even disadvantages, but I'm pretty sure that many people will try to use this to manipulate and to create a totally different reality in many situations.
Yeah, I know that feeling because I feel so victorious after I managed to get it to come on my side. Well, now, thank you so much, Alex. What our discussion today proves that election is no longer just about true and false, right? It's about how algorithms are being built. It's about how AI evidence is being verified, and also how the legal frontier is able to keep up with technology. In other words, fact-checking has evolved, right? It's not just about checking a claim. It's about auditing the systems that try to decide what we see and what we hear, and ultimately what we believe. So thank you, Alex, today for sharing your expertise with us. Thank you so very much. And to our audience, thank you for your participation. Till we meet again next time, take care, and thank you very much.
My pleasure. Take good care of us.